In the last few hundred years, we've lost sight of something important. It used to be the norm for people to spend a hefty sum on clothing, which would last them decades. The labor-intensive process of creating a fabric and crafting clothes from it was reflected in the price. And while mass manufacturing has done us good in some ways, in other ways it's caused us to overlook how much work goes into each garment. We've forgotten that clothes deserve care, mending, and cherishing. Instead, many of us purchase cheaply made hauls that end up unloved in the depths of our closets, only to degrade into toxic microplastics that pollute our oceans and developing countries for decades to come. Fortunately, I rarely find myself actually buying clothes. Yes, that's partly because of my crippling awareness of hyperconsumerism, but mostly because I'm completely fashion illiterate, and trying on clothes only to have them inevitably not fit my unique proportions is my unique version of hell. I have a torso that goes on for days and breasts that refuse to stop growing despite surgical intervention, so it happens often. Long story short, I want to live in a way that minimizes my contribution to the global consumption and waste problem, while also addressing all the ill-fitting clothes that I already own. So I bought a sewing machine so I can learn to tailor and mend. And maybe one day I'll graduate to thrift flips and creating clothes from scratch from thrifted and natural fabrics. But for now, here's day one of a total beginner learning how to sew and everything you need to know to get started too. This is what I'll be going over in the video, and by the end, I'm hoping to cinch a waist, hem a pant, and mend a couple holes. Wish me luck. I spent hours researching different sewing machines, what deal breakers to look for, what are must-haves, and what is a good budget for a beginner. These are the must-haves I found for a beginner sewing machine. The more stitch patterns, the better. It should have at least 5. It should have automatic needle threading, a free arm, which means the better the sewing machine is suspended in the air so that a tube of fabric like a sleeve can be slid over it, a big throat, variable speed control, one-touch stop-start reverse, a buttonhole maker, and multiple accessory feet. Typically for a new sewing machine, a good beginner one will be around $100 to $200, but you can get them cheaper used as long as they hit all the points on the checklist. I ended up getting a used one online for $80. She needs a name, so let me know what I should call her in the comments, or I'll end up calling her something embarrassing like Sawyer or Threadnut. And then for gathering materials, what I learned you need as the barest minimum to get started are scissors, thread, pins, a seam ripper, measuring tape, and an iron, but a straightener will do. And everything I'm using in this video is linked in the description below. Life hack, join your local Buy Nothing group on Facebook. It's basically a hyper-local gifting economy, and post there saying you're in search of sewing materials. You never know what you'll get for free. Quick summary of how the stitches work. There's a thread that comes in from above the fabric, and there's a thread that comes in from below. The thread above is threaded into the sewing machine needle, and the thread below is wound around a bobbin. Each sewing machine is a little different, but the components are usually similar. There's the bobbin winder that winds the thread onto the bobbin, a dial that controls the stitch length, pin that holds the spool of thread, a dial that controls the stitch width, a dial that controls the tension, a thread guide for when you're threading the machine and the bobbin, a thread take-up lever, which is also used to thread the machine, a thread cutter, an automatic needle threader, a quick set bobbin, a flatbed attachment with an accessory compartment, a presser foot, a reverse sewing lever which changes the stitch into the reverse direction, a pattern selection guide, a hand wheel used to manually raise and lower the needle, a switch to turn on the machine and the light, a presser foot lever which raises and lowers the presser foot, and a foot controller which is used to start and stop sewing and to control the speed. To set up the sewing machine, first I had to thread the bobbin that provides the thread from underneath. The nice thing is all the instructions are shown on the sewing machine itself and with a guide that comes with the machine, so I did that. I got the string onto the bobbin, and then I followed another set of instructions for threading the needle itself. Disclaimer, guys, do not buy these small spools. I thought these tiny little things would work fine, but they kept on flying off. Buy larger ones like this instead. Alright, and it's finally time to start sewing. So project 1 is hemming this pair of linen pants that are way too long on me. You can see I had them safety pinned, but even then it wasn't great to wear. More specifically, I blind hemmed these pants, which is basically where you can't see the stitches used to shorten them. I wanted to practice first, so I messed around on a reusable paper towel I have and did some zigzag and straight stitches. And once I saw that the fabric didn't look like it was sent back and forth through a shredder, I psyched myself up to sew on the actual pants. I won't go into detail for each step, but to do that, I first seam ripped the original hem, cut some extra fabric off, marked where I wanted the new length to be, did the fancy fold you need for this technique, switched the presser foot that holds down the fabric to one specifically made for blind hemming, and sewed. This wasn't the easiest project to start with, but after a bunch of measuring and remeasuring and remeasuring and remeasuring, it turned out so good. I don't think any true seamstress would be impressed, but I didn't want to take the pants off or stopped working in them after, so that's a job well done in my book. Project 2 was cinching the waist of the shirt that I thrifted ages ago but have never worn. I'm still unsure if I like the style of it, but I'm not gonna throw it away. This project was a little harder because of the material of the shirt and the weird cut of it, but the idea was I put it on inside out and marked where I wanted the waist taken in. I actually marked it a little looser than I truly wanted because the material isn't stretchy, so I worried it wouldn't fit over my head. And then I sewed down that line, cut off the excess, leaving about half an inch for seam allowance, then I zigzag stitched over that seam allowance to keep it from fraying. This one took a lot more work than anticipated for a couple reasons. One is there's this important rule when you're sewing that whenever you start a stitch, you have to sew forward a little, reverse stitch over it, and then keep going. And you also end the stitch the same way too, and that keeps the thread from unraveling. But it's something I forgot to do a couple of times, or I didn't do it correctly, so I had to redo the whole thing each time. In the end, I made it work, but I definitely cut corners, and it would get me laughed at by anyone who knows their stuff. The last project was super quick. Just wanted to fix this frayed section of this thrifted skirt. So pretty, by the way, right? I just did a basic zigzag stitch for this one, so I made sure to turn the dial to that setting. I'm not sure if that was exactly the right move, but it worked to keep the fraying in check so far. But please let me know if you know better. Okay, now learn from my mistakes. These are tips for what I would do differently next time. 1, to make your life easier, make sure when you're feeding the fabric into the machine that the heads of the pins are facing towards you. It just makes it way easier to pull them out when you're sewing. 2, pay attention to where the tags are so you don't accidentally sew over them like I did. 3, it takes a second to get a hang of the sewing speed. It kind of reminds me of when I first started learning to drive a car, when it felt really difficult to understand just how much pressure to put on the pedal, but you start to get a feel for it pretty quickly. 4, don't be surprised when you make a mistake a bunch of times and have to seam rip over and over and over again. It's just part of the process. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, but before I let you go, allow me to rant for just a little bit longer. Clothes have become a symbol of many things, among them being a standard by which we measure ourselves. If I come across a shirt in my usual size that doesn't fit, I take that as a failure on my part, not the part of the manufacturer who designs all clothing to cater to a generically average set of measurements that nobody truly has. It doesn't have to be this way if we can just give our clothes a little extra attention. Also, there's nothing feminine or silly about sewing and tailoring your clothes. And though historically it's been seen as a feminine activity, the fact that it can often in today's society still be seen as an unmanly thing to do reflects values either perpetuated by capitalism and the patriarchy, or only serves to support the patriarchy and capitalism for their monetary and power-driven gain. I invite you to resist the allure of cheap Shein hauls and consider the significance of the clothes that you own, as well as the broader story behind the next garment that you choose to buy. Will we be proud to own it, and will we care for it for years to come? And while you may think that donating your unused clothing to a thrift store is a way around the waste problem, you'll be saddened to know that only around 16% of clothes that get donated actually end up finding a new home. The rest end up in landfills, the bottom of the ocean, or shipped overseas where they cause public health crises. In Ghana, they even have a name for it, Obroni Wawu, dead white man's clothing. I'll personally be trying my best to practice this new mentality and appreciation for well-worn clothing. I want to train the muscle that wants to extend a helping hand and gratitude for both the garments themselves as well as the individuals that dedicated their craftsmanship to provide for me over the years. I don't doubt that mentality will bleed into other areas of my life. Change happens when many try to make a difference imperfectly, not when one person tries to make a difference perfectly. So thank you so much for joining me, and if you're craving more sewing info, I've linked a bunch of YouTubers that I used in preparing for this video in the description below. See you next time. Oh my goodness.